There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew is shattered in front of your very eyes, not by propaganda, not by media noise, but by truth, by witnessing the sheer resilience of people who've lost everything yet still hold on to something stronger than bullets or borders. Faith. I visited Palestine with opinions. Economies. I left with purpose. This isn't just my story. It's a confession, a transformation, a challenge to everything I thought was certain. Here's exactly why I became Muslim after visiting Palestine. They told me I'd see. Before I ever stepped foot on Palestinian soil, they said it would be dangerous, that I'd be surrounded by radicals, that I should be careful who I trust. And foolishly, I believed them. I bought into the headlines. I absorbed the stereotypes. I nodded politely during cocktail conversations in London as people casually dismissed an entire people as a problem, as a headline, as a statistic. But then I walked the streets of Ramallah. I stood in the rubble of Gaza. I heard the calls to prayer across a land soaked in sorrow. And what I saw, it shattered everything. Not in an aggressive, political way. No, in the most human way imaginable. A child no older than 7 tugged at my jacket. His school had been bombed a week before. He offered me a biscuit. Economies. That's what he had, a single biscuit. And he offered it to a stranger and take it. I couldn't speak because in that one act, I saw something the West has tragically lost you. Dignity, even in devastation. I met a father who had buried 2 of his sons in the last month. He smiled as he served tea, smiled. I asked him how. His answer, everything is from Allah. And just like that, a sentence stripped me bare. I didn't know what to say. This man had every reason to hate, to rage, to curse the sky. But instead, he poured tea and spoke with a calm I couldn't understand because I had never pain dressed as peace before. You see, they warned me of terrorists. But they didn't tell me about teachers holding classes in tents. They didn't tell me about mothers cooking for strangers during Ramadan. They didn't show me imams wiping the dust off children's faces. They didn't show me the resistance of a people who have nothing, yet give everything. And perhaps that's the most confronting part. It wasn't what they did, it was how they lived, with purpose, with discipline, with a faith so deep it felt unshakable. I've been in war zones before. I've spoken to presidents, dictators, survivors. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize the most misrepresented people on earth might be the most faithful. There was no camera crew with me, no makeup, no rehearsed scripts, just truth, raw and confronting, the kind that doesn't just challenge your beliefs, it shatters them. And when I left that checkpoint, when I crossed back into the so-called safe zone, I didn't feel safer. I felt hollow because I knew the world I was returning to would never believe the truth I'd just seen. They'll ask, what changed you? And I'll say this, I didn't change because of books. I changed because I saw, I felt. And when you see a people under siege still choosing prayer over panic, kindness over cruelty, and favor fear, you don't leave the same. You can't. There's something powerfully unnerving about witnessing a people who are materially poor but spiritually rich. It humbles you. It interrogates your comfort, and it forces you to confront an ugly truth, maybe, just maybe. The ones we pity are spiritually wealthier than we are. You think you know what faith is, until you see it alive in people who have every reason to abandon it. That's the part that shook me. Not the destruction, not the politics, not even the pain. It was the faith, the way Islam didn't exist in theory. It existed in action, in the streets, in the broken homes, in the way people carried themselves, even with empty pockets and shattered walls. I've been to cathedrals across Europe. I've sat in conversations with cardinals, rabbis, and philosophers. I've walked through Westminster Abbey and listened to sermons delivered with elegance and polish. But nothing prepared me for what I saw in Palestine. Because there, Islam isn't a religion you wear on a holiday or in a headline. It's something woven into every breath. It's present in silence. It's present in suffering. It's present in love. One night in a village that lost power, I watched a group of young boys kneel in the dark. No microphones, no stage, no crowd, just prayer mats on sand. Bombs had fallen nearby 2 days before. One of them had lost his uncle. They still prayed. Not with fear, not with haste, but with a stillness that unsettled me. It wasn't ritual. It was surrender. And that moment hit harder than any interview I've ever done. Faith in my part of the world is often debated like a sport, a talking point, a philosophical accessory we wear on Sundays and shed by Monday. But in Palestine, it's everything. It's the reason they wake up. It's the reason they keep going. It's not just something they believe in. It's something they embody. And that's when it hit Meg. I hadn't seen religion. I had seen conviction. There was a woman, her house half destroyed, 2 sons in prison, and yet she said to me, we don't cry, we make do. That's not just belief. That's defiance laced with devotion. That's a faith that doesn't flinch. She didn't quote scripture at me. She lived it. Every sentence she spoke was rooted in something deeper than ideology. It was rooted in surrender to the will of God. It's easy to admire people who have comfort and remain calm. But what about those with nothing? Absolutely nothing. Who still say, Alhamdulillah. What kind of spiritual force sustains that? It wasn't naivety. It wasn't denial. It was clarity. Something that made my cynicism look embarrassingly shallow. And that's where the transformation began, because I didn't just witness Islam, I felt it. In the way they gave from their scarcity, in the way they smiled through grief, in the way they never missed a prayer, even if it meant praying next to a crater. It made me question everything I'd ever associated with religion. It made me realize I had been taught to see faith as fragile. But in Palestine, I saw it as indestructible. You want to talk about strength. It's not in the tanks. It's not in the drones. It's not in the headlines screaming dominance. Real strength is in the mother who says, Allahu Akbar, as she buries her child. Real strength is in the boy who recites Surah al-Fatiha under curfew. Real strength is in the man who forgives his enemy and then turns to Mecca and whispers gratitude. That's when I understood. Islam in Palestine isn't about rules. It's about resilience. It's not about identity. It's about intimacy with the divine. And when you see that up close, you don't just leave with questions. You leave with a choice. And I knew I had to make mine. That realization didn't come to me gently. It slammed into me the moment I stepped out of the airport and into the reality of Palestine, because nothing I had been told, absolutely nothing, resembled the truth I saw with my own eyes. It was like walking out of a theater into a battlefield. The story I had been watching wasn't just fiction. It was curated propaganda dressed up as journalism. They told me Islam was dangerous. They told me Palestinians were radicals. They told me this conflict was centuries of hatred, unresolvable, irrational. But no one told me about the young carrying his baby sister across a demolished street, both barefoot, both silent. No one told me about the doctors working 36-hour shifts in makeshift hospitals. No one told me about the father who lost his home, still saying, we forgive for the sake of Allah. You see, it's very easy to believe a lie when you're never forced to look at the truth. And that's exactly what happened to me. For years, I saw this region as a political chessboard, but when I sat on the ground with people who had nothing but their prayer beads and their core, and I realized how deliberately we've been misled. And let me tell you, there is nothing more dangerous to falsehood than a man who starts asking the wrong questions. Why do we only hear one version of the story? Why are the oppressed always the ones painted as the aggressors? Why is the language of resistance always criminalized, but the language of occupation always legal? These aren't just questions. They are indictments of a system that profits from keeping you ignorant. And so I began to unlearn. I started reading not headlines, but history. I spoke to people, not diplomats, but survivors. And slowly, layer by layer, the propaganda fell away. And underneath it all was something horrifyingly simple. People who just wanted to live, to worship, to walk to school without fear, to bury their dead without another missile flying overhead. But the media never shows you that. Because the moment you humanize the enemy, the narrative collapses. And make no mistake, this narrative is very profitable for the powerful. Fear is a currency. Misrepresentation is a weapon. And Islam has been its easiest target. What I saw in Palestine didn't make me angry at Islam. It made me angry at how Islam had been portrayed. The peace, the patience, the compassion, it was the opposite of everything I had been told. And that revelation wasn't just uncomfortable. It was infuriating. Because I had been a willing participant in the lie, I had echoed it, I had believed it. And now, standing in front of men who had lost everything but still smiled as they offered me tea, I felt ashamed. That kind of truth doesn't politely ask for space in your mind. It crashes through the walls of your worldview and demands your rebuild from scratch. And when you do, you realize something terrifying. The war on Islam isn't just a political agenda, it's a psychological one, designed to keep people blind to the beauty of something that could change them. The first thing that hits you isn't the rubble, it's not the burned out buildings or the bullet holes in the walls, it's the people, the way they walk, the way they stand vidimus, as if they're holding up something invisible but heavy, and yet they're not broken. You look at them and you see something that simply shouldn't be there, not in that context. Not under that pressure. You see unity, not the kind you find in boardrooms, not the type you see politicians pretend to have on television. This is something far deeper. It's brotherhood, the unshakable kind, the kind forget under bombs, shaped in silence and sealed in prayer. I didn't expect that. Frankly, I wasn't prepared for it. Because we live in a world that glorifies individualism. In mine now, we are taught to rise alone, win alone, survive alone. But here I was in the heart of Palestine, watching families break their last piece of bread with strangers, sharing what little water they had with neighbors, giving away food during Ramadan when they barely had enough for themselves. You don't fake that. That's not optics. That's Islam in its rawest, purest form, a collective heartbeat beating for one another. And the most extraordinary thing, it's not even considered heroics, it's expected, it's their way of life. There was a moment that stopped me cold. A young man had just returned from visiting his father in an Israeli prison. He'd been gone 10 years, torched, starved, and yet when he saw a stranger on the road struggling to lift a sack of flour, he rushed to help. No hesitation, no calculation, no victim mentality, just instinct. Serve, poor, stand together. This isn't the Islam they show you on the evening news. This isn't the Muslim world as painted by warmongers and opportunists. This is the Ummah, the global brotherhood. And in Palestine, I saw it thriving under siege. It was in the way people lined up to donate blood after an airstrike, not asking who it was for, not caring what faction, what background, what surname. It was in the way men stood to shoulder in prayer, one barefoot, one bandaged, one broken, but all equal before God. No class, no politics, no division, just faith, just family. And then it hit me. This is what we're afraid of the West, not Islam as a threat, but Islam as a force of unity, as a model of brotherhood so powerful, it terrifies the architects of division. Because if you teach people to love one another without condition, how will you sell them enemies? Palestine taught me that Islam isn't built on slogans, it's built on service. That brotherhood isn't a concept, it's a responsibility. It means giving your last drop of water, not because you have to, but because you'd be ashamed not to. It means crying in silence so someone else can sleep in peace. It means believing that even under occupation, your duty to your brother never ends. We've lost that in our part of the world. We walk past each other like ghosts. We scroll through suffering and feel nothing. We lock our doors and build walls around our hearts. But in Palestine, I saw no walls, only hands reaching out, only arms lifting up, only hearts that beat not for self-preservation, but for one another. And when you witness that kind of unity, when you see brotherhood carried not on slogans, but on shoulders, you start to wonder who's really free. You expect fear in a war zone. You expect panic, trembling hands, people hiding, people running. You prepare yourself for the chaos. But what you don't expect, what no one tells you to brace for, is the peace, not outside, but inside them, the calm that somehow defies the explosions, the dignity that stands tall even when the world around it collapses. That shook me to my core. You don't find this kind of peace in quiet hotels or luxurious yoga retreats. You don't buy it with a plane ticket to the Maldives or a therapist on speed dial. You find it in people who have lost everything, yet still carry something unbreakable. And in Palestine, I found myself surrounded by men, women, and children who had nothing left, but were never empty. There was a moment, early morning, just after Fajr prayer, the sky was tinted grey. The streets were eerily quiet. I was with a group of men who had gathered on a patch of open earth, not a mosque, just a slab of concrete where a mosque used to be. It had been leveled in the last round of bombings, but that didn't stop them. They prayed on the rubble, on the dust. In absolute silence, their backs straight, heads bowed, not to oppression, but to God. I stood there watching, wondering how anyone could still believe, still worship, still trust. I've seen people lose faith over far less, over heartbreak, over politics, over inconvenience. But here they were unwavering. And that's when I realized this wasn't blind devotion. It was clarity. These weren't desperate men clinging to fantasy. These were grounded souls anchored in something deeper than circumstance. There's a strange kind of power in surrender, not weakness, not defeat, but conscious surrender to a will beyond your own. And I saw it everywhere, in the way they smiled after losing their homes, in the way they welcomed strangers with warm eyes and open arms, in the way they whispered, Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un, after burying a child, not screaming, not collapsing, just economies. Whispering, it made me uncomfortable at first, because we're not used to that kind of strength in the West. We confuse noise with power, outrage with depth. But these people didn't need to raise their voices. Their silence was thunderous, their serenity louder than any protest. They weren't fighting the world. They were in alignment with something bigger than it. And it got to me, not immediate, not publicly, but internally something cracked, because I'd spent the lifetime chasing a peace I could never seem to hold on to, a peace that evaporated the moment the lights went out. But theirs remained, in grief, in ruin, in injustice. It didn't vanish, it deepened. And that forced a confrontation inside me, an uncomfortable, necessary one. If they could stand in the ashes of their lives and still say, Allah, the biggest economies, knows best, then what excuse did I have? What was I missing? What truth had I ignored? And most importantly, what had they found that I hadn't? They didn't have the answers to every political question. They didn't offer solutions for the world's broken systems, but they had something far more profound. Peace in the storm, not after it, in it. And that, I realized, wasn't accidental. It was Islam. And once you witness that kind of inner strength up close, once you see peace holding its ground where even hope has fled, you stop asking, how do they survive? And you start asking, what have they surrendered tog, and why haven't I? You don't plan a transformation. It ambushes you. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or dramatic music. It slips in quietly through a single moment, a single sentence, a single soul who looks at you in a way that makes every lie you've ever believed suddenly collapse. That's what happened to me. I didn't go to Palestine to become Muslim. I went there to observe. But I left having surrendered, not to a people, not to a political idea, economies, but to a truth I couldn't run from anymore. Because at some point, the excuses just stop working. You can only call things coincidence for so long. You can only dismiss beauty as illusion for so long. You can only resist clarity for so long before it burns through your intellectual pride and forces you to face what you've spent years avoiding, the possibility that you were wrong. And that's exactly what I had to admit. I was wrong, not just about Islam, not just about Palestine, but about everything I thought was solid, everything I thought would bring me peace, control, fulfillment. I had status, I had wealth, a voice that echoed across media. But what I didn't have was stillness. What I didn't have was surrender. And without that, all the rest is noise. There was no sudden voice no flash of light, no dramatic moment where I fell to my knees. No, what happened was slower, deeper, more uncomfortable. It was sitting with people who should hate and yet they forgive. It was walking through cities where everything has been taken yet hearts remain full. It was hearing alhamdulillah in the aftermath of trauma over and over again. I saw this same pattern, devastation on the outside, discipline on the inside. And I realized I had spent my whole life avoiding surrender. I wore independence like a badge. I framed submission as weakness. I treated control as success. But here I was surrounded by people who had none of those things, and yet were stronger than me, richer than me, freer than me. It broke something in me. Because once you see that, you can't unsee it. The biggest economies, you can't go back to your world of superficial comfort and pretend you're fulfilled. You can't go back to your screens and think those pixels represent reality. You can't sit in your home and say, I'm at peace, when you've just watched a child pray with more focus and more gratitude than you've ever felt. And that's the truth that hits hardest. Islam didn't come to me as a religion to adopt. It came as a mirror. It didn't ask me to believe blindly. It demanded I look honestly at my life, my habits, at my arrogance. It called me to accountability, not to impress others, not to score points, but to answer one impossible question. What will you stand for when everything else is stripped away? And I couldn't lead myself anymore. I had seen too much. I had felt too much. The resistance was gone. The questions were answered. What remained was choice, not a choice of lifestyle, a choice of truth. And when truth stares at you with the eyes of a grieving mother who still says, we trust in Allah, you don't debate it. You don't intellectualize it. You don't politicize it.